Hi, I'm Lee Mermalan, and in this video we're going to look at MIDI, instrument and audio effect racks. So Ableton Live has three key different types of devices. We have MIDI devices, which allow us to take MIDI data, which is musical information, and process it. Then we have instrument devices, which take that MIDI data and they turn it into sound. Then we have audio devices, which take sound and process it further to give us different sound. So in terms of a rack is basically a grouping to get one or more devices into a container, which makes it easier to manage in a project, makes it easier to do some complex processing ideas for whether it's MIDI or audio data. And it also allows us to just easily modify sounds over time when we're dealing with a lot of different devices. So if I go to a new MIDI track and I load in a MIDI device, if I go and group that, I've now turned a MIDI device into a MIDI effect rack. Now you can have more than one device in there. You can have ultimately an infinite amount of devices in there. But the whole point is once you've contained it in a group, it's now become a rack. So let's do that again, but this time let's do it with an instrument. So if I load up analog, if I was to try and save analog right now using the save preset button, I'll actually just save an analog preset. Whereas if I group it first, this is now an instrument rack. And if I go to save from the actual main view here, save the actual instrument rack, it will be saved with all the containing parts for that rack. Finally, if I go to audio effects and I load in any preset really, and I group that, that is now an audio effect rack. So the only thing that's a bit of a kind of crossover point between these is MIDI effect racks can only contain MIDI devices. Audio effect racks can only contain audio devices. However, an instrument rack can contain instruments, MIDI devices, and audio devices too. So let's put that into context. If I look over at some MIDI effects, we get an arpeggiator in here, and then we get our instrument, and then we get our processing. If these are all highlighted together and then grouped, this is an instrument rack, but it contains processing for the data before the instrument turns it into sound, so the MIDI side, and then it also has audio processing to modify the sound once it comes out of the instrument too. So let's have a look at some examples of instrument rack presets. So if I click the hot swap button here, we can find out where this came from. This came from instrument racks within the instrument part of the live browser, the bass section, and then it's called deep and dark. So we'll just play this example for a minute. Okay, so all the instrument parts in this are using instrument racks. So this bass track that I've got running now, I have a view which is called a macro view, and this is the show hide button for that. And then there's up to 8 assigned controls for anything that's within the rack. So the person who designs the rack is the person who decides what it is you get to see as the kind of front of house look of this preset. If we actually show the devices, which is this show hide button here, we can see that this contains an analog device followed by a compressor, a vinyl distortion, 2 delays, and then a reverb. So the space control and the delay controls are most likely going to change various aspects of those ambient controls at the end of the processing chain. We have a cutoff filter, which I can't see exactly where that's being controlled right now. Oh, there it is at the bottom of the screen. So it's changing the actual onboard filter on the instrument itself. This drive control, if we open up vinyl distortion, I imagine it's most likely changing an aspect of that processor. And compression, as you might have guessed, is going to be in the actual compression section So it's the dry wet control of that device. Okay, so that's a preset that's loaded in. Let's move over to the next one. So we're going to open up the device show hide again, and let's see what's in here. It's quite simple, an analog, a chorus and a reverb. And let's try our next one. Okay, so we have some MIDI effect racks here that contains an arpeggiator and a note length device. Then we have an instrument rack, which again I can find by hot swapping, finding out where that came from. And then what I'm going to do with this one is just add an audio effect as well. So I'll go to audio effect racks, go to space, and then let's try this ample space delay. Okay, so this is a MIDI rack, instrument rack, and audio rack as well. There's one more button that I haven't shown you yet in terms of our main navigation of a rack. It's this chain list view here. So if I open this up, this is quite a complex instrument. So what we have here is 3 different chains within this rack. What that means is there's 3 different channels. Now, if there's chains within a MIDI rack, it will be MIDI channels. And if there's chains within an instrument rack, it can be instrument channels. So in this case, if I show up the device view, there's one operator loaded into this preset, but some of the presets you'll see, if I just drag and copy that with the Alt key, you'll see that there's actually multiple instruments that are all played at the same time when you hold down the note that goes into that instrument. So if we go to the audio effects racks, we have here a dry chain, a flanged chain, and then a chorused chain as well. And the dry one, if we just bring up the device view, has nothing loaded into it because it's dry, meaning unprocessed. So that's just a chance for the designer of this preset to allow the sound to pass through untainted. But then you have 2 parallel chains, which are 2 of the channels, which allow a flanger to pass through. And then on the other one, it's a combination of chorus and an auto pan effect as well. So the last thing I want to do before we finish focusing on these is look at how we build these up ourselves. So I'm going to get an instrument, load that on. I want to get some audio processing going on here as well. So I'm going to add in a chorus and then maybe a reverb as well. Okay, so I'm going to turn this into an instrument rack by holding Shift and just highlighting all the devices, then Control click and group. And then I'm going to look at designing my own macros. So we've looked at how we can navigate someone else's presets, but the context here would be that I might be making a song. I found a good combination of devices that work well together, and I want them to do something in my song, but I don't want to end up having to navigate lots of different parameters to make one event happen in my song. What we can do is we can bind multiple parameters to one of these macro controls, and then we just deal with that macro control whenever we need to make that motion of sound within our projects. So I'm going to reveal the macro show hide, and because this is a brand new rack, none of these are populated yet. So I'm thinking of things that might sound, good within my project idea. So I think if I go for the filter control, and I set that to macro 1, and then you'll hear this as it plays. So I'm now filtering that in and out. And I want another macro to control the dry wet as well as the dry wet of the reverb as well. So I'm going to assign the dry wet of the chorus as well as the dry wet of the reverb to the same macro. So let's just do a little bit of housekeeping here. If I control click, I can rename that macro and just call this filter. Give it a color just to make it easy to distinguish from the other macros and what they might control. And then this is going to be, let's rename this. So this is going to be my chorus space, let's call it, because it's reverb and it's chorus as well. So by default, if I just minimize analog by double clicking on the title bar there, if I move this macro all the way to the left, you'll see that the two dry wets that are assigned to that macro are all the way to the left, and if I move it all the way to the right, you'll see that the dry wet on both of those has moved all the way to the right. But it may be that I want there to be an independent amount of movement on both of those assigned parameters. So this map box, if we open that up, let's just see what we call the range assignment for a parameter. So at the moment, when the macro is at the left, it will make the dry wet of the chorus be right at the bottom value, 0%. Then when the macro is at the right, it will take the chorus up to its fullest amount, which is 100% there. So what I can do is independently just switch that to go down. So it's only 50%, or I can write in once I've put focus by clicking on there. And the reverb too, I might not want that to go quite as far. So if I just click on the reverb there, so it shows up in the list, it's a bit easier to find it that way. And let's just go for a bit more of a subtle amount of reverb there. So I'm going to make sure the reverb's really kind of obvious in this context. So I'm putting the decay time up quite high. So it's going to start off with both of those parameters all the way down, but then they'll go up at different amounts to their end range. Okay, so in terms of handling that in a project, it's very easy now for me to go to Show Automation, and then as needed within my project, draw in a line for whenever those dials need to do certain things within the project. But as you can imagine, if I'm doing 2 dry wet controls as part of a sound movement, or even more, it could be 5, 6, 7, or as many as your sound design requires, having one macro to automate to make those changes within your project is way more manageable than having obviously 5, 6, 7, 8 different automation lanes to edit as well. So the last thing we want to look at is how we save this. So if I go to my device, as long as you've got the macro view up here, you can see the little save preset button. And if we click that, it will divert me to my user library, and I can call this my super chorus pad machine, let's call it that. Now that's going to be recallable on this computer whenever I navigate my user library in the future. Another option is you can add a personal space to your browser and drag and drop it to that space for future use and recall as well. So we've looked at MIDI, instrument and audio racks, how we can load them in, how we can navigate the different parameters, and then also how to make our own and save them into our live user library.